I have an older brother who is 4 years older than me. He was in his sophomore year of college when I was in my first year of high school. One summer, something incredibly terrifying happened, and it resulted in the disappearance of my brother's friend. It was that summer when my brother and his university friends decided to visit a water park with a swimming pool. There were a total of 8 people, both guys and girls in their group. The incident occurred in the early evening, just as the sun was beginning to set. My brother called me, his voice filled with nervousness, and said, "Something big has happened. I'll be coming home late today." With that, he abruptly hung up the phone. By the time my brother returned home, it was already past midnight. His face appeared worn and haggard, as if he had aged considerably in just one day. My mother, awakening from her sleep, rushed to his room. We all anxiously questioned him about what had happened. Here is what he told us. As the swimming pool was about to close for the day, and they were all preparing to leave, they suddenly realized that one of their friends was missing. They searched everywhere, making phone calls, but no matter how hard they looked, they couldn't find him. Even the pool staff couldn't provide any help. My brother and the others decided to go to the missing friend's house. It was already 9 p.m. when they arrived, but their friend still hadn't returned. Worried, they reported the disappearance to the police. Since there was no sign of their friend, my brother returned home. He recounted the events, but I noticed something strange in his expression. It seemed like there were details he hadn't shared with us. As I was someone who had a sensitivity to the supernatural, I decided to investigate further. I asked my brother what was really going on, and he admitted that he felt it wasn't a human act. I agreed with his assessment, finding the entire situation eerie. It was as if some force beyond human understanding was at play. The next morning, my brother made another call to his friend's home. They were told that their friend still hadn't returned. My brother called his friend's house every day for the entire week, but he still didn't come back. And so, a week passed like this. This marked a week since he had gone missing. My brother decided to visit the friend's parents, believing that something supernatural might be involved. He invited me to come along, as we both shared this peculiar sensitivity to the paranormal. Early in the morning, we arrived at their friend's house. My brother explained the situation to the friend's mother, who became extremely emotional and even collapsed to the floor at one point. When she regained her composure, her expression turned grave. She left the room briefly and returned holding a photograph. The moment I saw that photograph, an indescribable feeling washed over me, a feeling I would never forget. The picture had been taken by a photographer from a magazine. Coincidentally, on the same day my brother and his friends had visited the swimming pool. The photograph captured their missing friend in the midst of jumping from the high diving board. What made the photo chilling was not just the missing friend, but a white-haired elderly woman clinging tightly to his body as he descended. It was as if she was an unearthly presence, clearly visible in the photograph. My brother and I were left speechless, our bodies covered in goosebumps. This incident, which occurred over a decade ago, remains unsolved to this day. No one can explain how my brother's friend vanished without a trace. Perhaps, as the photograph suggests, he was taken by something otherworldly, something beyond our comprehension. This happened when I was in the 3rd grade of elementary school. I was very young when my mother passed away, and my father raised me. Due to my introverted personality, I had a tough time making friends, and I faced exclusion from the 1st grade onwards. I was frequently bullied at school, and by the time I reached the 3rd grade, I couldn't take it anymore. I started refusing to go to school, so my father temporarily sent me to stay with my grandparents in a remote countryside area. It was such a secluded place that it's hard to imagine such a place exists. During my time there, I enjoyed a laid-back life with the sparse population. There were only 2 or 3 high school students in the village, and I was the only child around. I loved insects, so I often went bug hunting. In a place like that, everywhere felt like a treasure trove. About half a year passed, and I remember it was August when I met a sister. She was a beautiful woman with long black hair, somewhere between 25 and 35 years old. It started when she approached me one day while I was catching bugs nearby. She asked, "Aren't you from around here? Are you visiting for the summer?" I didn't know how to respond. Maybe she sensed that. So she looked at the bug cage I was holding and said, "Wow, you've caught so many. Can I see?" I showed her the insects and told her a lot about them. She listened attentively, often praising me because I had rarely been praised by anyone before. I told my grandparents about her, and my grandfather said, "Maybe it's the daughter of the Amanda's family returning for the summer. Just don't cause any trouble." Since it was a place with an extremely low population, it was unlikely for outsiders to visit. My grandparents didn't think much of it. From that day on, I started playing with the sister. We caught bugs in the fields, went to the river together, and always met by the riverside. The sister was a bit peculiar. Whenever I asked about her, she skillfully avoided those topics. However, she always listened carefully when I talked. I often told her about being bullied at school, missing my mother, and even shared my frustrations that I hadn't told my grandparents. After hearing my complaints, she would always comfort me gently. I often thought, if only she were my mother. I even said those words to her once, but she looked quite sad after hearing them. Not long after meeting the sister, my health began to deteriorate. I initially thought it was just a cold, but I had no fever or cold symptoms, just a persistent feeling of weakness and discomfort. At that time, I couldn't find the cause. But the most important thing was that even when I felt unwell, I always wanted to see the sister. If I couldn't meet her, I became very disheartened. So I often ran to the riverside to find her. However, my condition worsened. My grandparents started getting worried, and I was restricted from going to the place where I met the sister. So I started playing near my grandparents' house, and my health gradually improved. However, I still felt unwell overall. Despite my condition, I still wanted to see the sister. But seeing my grandparents' concern, I refrained from causing them any more trouble. One day, I was in the fields behind my grandparents' house, looking for bugs around noon, when I heard a woman greeting me. I turned around, and it was the sister. She had suddenly appeared. And although I found it strange, I didn't feel afraid. She asked, "What's wrong?" I told her that I had to leave, and she sadly responded, "I see, but I think it's for the best. I'll be rooting for you from afar." I asked her if I could still see her if I came back, and she shook her head. Then she walked away, disappearing into the fields. Later that evening, I remembered this incident and asked my grandparents why they hadn't said anything when I was with the sister during the day. They both frowned, and my grandfather said, "Weren't you playing alone during the day? We only saw you walking further away." I was shocked by my grandfather's response, and their expressions grew stiffer. My grandfather hurriedly called my father, and after the call, my grandmother came to me and said, "You should go back to your father soon. You can't stay here anymore. When you go back, be good and go to school." I felt hopeless upon hearing my grandmother's words. She told me that a long time ago, this land often had cases of children mysteriously disappearing. It was said that they were spirited away, hidden by spirits, and their whereabouts remained unknown. There was a legend that the fewer friends a child had, the more susceptible they were to being spirited away. These children would also experience unexplained discomfort in their bodies before disappearing. So, I decided to return to city life a week later. During that week, I didn't leave my grandparents' house at all. My grandmother was constantly worried, but I was still feeling disheartened because I couldn't see the sister. On the day I was supposed to return, I waited on the porch in the yard, feeling gloomy, and my father came to pick me up. That's when the sister suddenly appeared in my grandparents' yard. Although I found it strange, I didn't feel scared. She asked me what was wrong, and I told her that I had to leave. She responded sadly, "I see, but I think it's for the best." I asked if I could see her again if I returned, and she shook her head, then walked away into the fields. After returning to city life, I quickly adjusted to school, and I was no longer bullied. My health also improved, and I started living a normal life. However, I never saw that sister again. To this day, I still don't know who she was. Maybe she was a ghost. Maybe a messenger of the spirited away. Or perhaps some kind of guardian. It's still a mystery. This incident happened during the summer of my 4th year in university. By my 3rd year, I had already completed most of my credits, so I only needed to come to school once a week. On that day, when I went to campus, I met up with a long-lost friend. It was from this university friend that I heard this story. My friend worked at a bookstore near a station close to our university. He had a daily routine of finishing work around 11 p.m. One day, as he was on his way home, he took the subway from the station. To get to the platform, you had to take a relatively long escalator ride down. And at that moment, there were no other people around. While halfway down the escalator, he noticed a woman coming up from the platform side. She had long hair, was of average height, and wore a black dress. Her hair was so long it covered her face. But my friend didn't pay much attention and continued past her. He then boarded the train and went home. The next day, he encountered the same long-haired woman again. And from that point on, he would see her every 2 to 3 days. She always appeared when there was no one else around but him. He initially dismissed it as a coincidence, but he started to worry that it might be something more sinister. His anxiety grew with each encounter. One day, he ran into the woman on the escalator once more. This time, he decided to take a closer look to ensure she wasn't a ghost. He closely observed the woman as they got closer and realized she appeared completely normal, which put his mind at ease. However, just as she brushed past him, something startling happened. He saw her skin through the gap in her hair, and it was pale with a slight yellowish tint. Her face was covered in cracks, and she had no whites in her eyes. Her gray irises seemed to be veiled by a thin film. Despite this terrifying sight, he couldn't tear his eyes away from her. He stared at her as they moved apart, and the woman's head suddenly turned 180 degrees to face him while her body remained forward. She looked at him with a wide, blood-red grin, revealing blood-red teeth within her cracked, pallid skin. Overwhelmed by fear, my friend couldn't speak or look away. The woman began speaking in a strange tone, and at an accelerated rate, uttering incomprehensible words. As she spoke, droplets of blood splattered from her mouth. My friend felt his heart racing, and he suddenly collapsed because he hadn't realized the escalator had reached the bottom. When he looked up in a reflexive moment, the woman was gone. He couldn't recall what happened afterward, only that he was cared for by station personnel and eventually made it home. The next day, he told me the story, and it made me uncomfortable since it happened at a station I sometimes frequented. However, I quickly forgot about it the day after hearing it. It wasn't until recently, when I was on an escalator near my home station, that I encountered a woman with long hair and a black dress, just like my friend had described. I saw her again the following day and the day after. Fearing what might happen, I decided to call my friend to ask if he had seen the woman again. He replied, "No, and I probably won't ever see her again." When I asked him if he had heard about the woman's story from someone before he started encountering her, there was a long pause before he responded, "Yeah, I heard it from a senior." After that, he hung up the phone, and despite my attempts to reach out, he blocked me on all social media platforms. While I didn't want to blame my friend for his actions, it made me realize that human nature can be just as unpredictable as the supernatural. So, I implore you, after hearing this story, please pay attention to those you encounter on escalators and be wary of the woman